What we're going to look at today is the secret shame of domestic abuse. And we quite often see celebrities on trial, whether that be on trial by public or on trial legally, when they've been accused of some kind of domestic abuse. And we weren't in the room, we don't know what's happened. However, it does highlight the fact that it can happen to absolutely all of us, absolutely any of us at any time. But the CDC reports that almost 1 in every 3 women has been slapped, pushed, or shoved by their intimate partner, and nearly 1 has been beaten, burned, choked, slammed against something, or hit with a fist. Then you've got the women who abuse men, like the classic image of the angry wife coming after her husband with a frying pan. Unfortunately, that is also true, but not nearly as prevalent as the male abuse of women. And we hear about it all the time. The women that call into the radio shows with whispered pleas, asking how they can gather the strength to leave their abusive boyfriend or husband, and the men who stand there, shamefaced, seeking help for the rage that comes out in physical violence against their wife and children, and the constant refrain of rape in all its permutations. And domestic violence covers a wide spectrum of physical, psychological, economic, and sexual abuse. The abuse often happens in cycles, where there's a period of time in which tension escalates and some sort of violent act is committed, which is then followed by a time of reconciliation and forgiveness, often giving the victim hope that the situation has changed, and it hasn't. And that cycle of abuse and reconciliation is good, the flip between good and bad, good and bad, good and bad. That creates what's called a trauma bond, which to come away from a trauma bond emotionally, it creates the same kind of addiction effect as heroin or cocaine. So when you look at a trauma bond, you're addicted to, psychologically, you're addicted to the highs that come after the lows, because you know that the highs will be great. So the good is, when it's good, it's great, it's fantastic. When it's bad, it's bloody awful. It's terrifying. It's horrific. And you kind of seek out those highs to combat the lows. And there is no blame in this. This is a neurobiochemical reaction that is caused by this cycle of abuse. And when you're a child, there is no escape possible. And all they can do is to bury the abuse committed against their mums in their father's abuse of their mother. They just keep it quiet and they bury it, and then they tend to lash out as teens and rebel. And when they become young adults, they are mirroring. There you go, done it today already. They are mirroring the abuse that they have seen, because they see that and they have been modeled that as the classic, normal, healthy relationship, because that's all they know. And that's not necessarily a good model for them to have seen, but they keep it secret. They can't tell anybody, and they act out, and they take alcohol and drugs, and they're promiscuous because they don't know any different, because this is the behavior that they have seen. And being, they channel that kind of out of control behavior into their work life. Sometimes they channel it into not working and basically being reactionary against society. And sometimes it takes a massive life-changing effect, like getting sick, getting diagnosed with a serious illness, or something really, really sort of life-changing happening, like, for example, being made homeless, being made unemployed, that really kind of makes them stop and think about their life. And it gives them a whole new opportunity to learn about healthy behaviors and, recovery from abuse and addiction. And there's a book that quite often is used called Truth Heals. So for a lot of people, being in an abusive relationship mirrors what they have seen during their childhood. And getting out of abuse, getting out from under that cosh or that hammer of abuse, it takes courage and desperation sometimes. And secrets can literally kill you. But victims of domestic violence often suffer silently. They don't talk about it. And they may be unable to leave. They may be trapped through isolation. They may be trapped through insecurity. They may be trapped through lack of funds, or the desire to protect children from a potentially worse situation. But the biggest reason, far and away, is fear and shame. So when people speak out about their experiences, it opens doors not only for themselves, but for others as well. Now, there is a great example of this. Charlize Theron, the actress, she grew up in South Africa. Her father was an abusive alcoholic who threatened to kill her and her mum. And when she was 15 years old, her mum shot and killed her father in self-defense. Out of that trauma, Charlize became a dedicated activist. She founded a rape crisis centre in South Africa, and she participated in Eve Ensler's V-Day project to raise awareness about abused women. And it's really interesting to note that Charlize has been reported to be in a relationship with Sean Penn, who was charged with felony domestic assault when he was married to Madonna. And the unconscious patterns that we grow up with are really hard to change. There's been a list of celebrities who have suffered domestic violence, including Rihanna, and she's been speaking out about overcoming the shame and humiliation of her abusive relationship with Chris Brown. There's Halle Berry, Robin Givens, Tina Turner, Whitney Houston, Christina Aguilera, Mariah Carey, and the list of those who have been charged or arrested for domestic violence is really long. Charlie Sheen, Mel Gibson, Sean Penn, Nicolas Cage, Steven Seagal, Ozzy Osbourne, James Brown, Gary Busey, John Barrymore, that's Drew Barrymore's father, James Caan, Dudley Moore, billionaire William Koch, and HBO chairman Chris Albrecht, for starters. And that's not even touching the list of pro athletes, heavy rockers and rappers, or the seemingly gentle new age musician Yanni. And it can happen to anyone. And the best way to get out from under the scourge of domestic abuse and violence is by breaking the power of the secret shame and letting someone know what's going on. So speak up and the truth can heal you. Now, it took me a long time for me to speak up about my shame. And there are times still when I'm still hesitant and scared to talk about it, because there are some really deep buried scars in there. But I have found that talking about it actually does make life better. Talking about what I endured actually helps, and me helping others to heal from domestic abuse also helps to heal me. So it's a little bit self-serving. It's not all just me giving. I get something back too. And I think one of the hardest things to do was to talk about what had happened, because I didn't want anybody to know. I felt guilty. I felt ashamed. I felt that people who knew me and who knew us would judge me. I felt that people at work that I worked with would lose respect for me. And I felt that I couldn't talk to my family about it, because that would mean that they were right all along. And there were so many different layers and layers and layers of shame. And it's really difficult to actually stand up and say, actually, yes, that was my situation, and I was too scared to speak. And like many others, I was too scared to leave, because I kind of figured that if I was there, I could protect my child, and I didn't want to have to share custody. And I was scared of the repercussions that would happen, because the threats and the intimidation tactics, they totally worked. They totally worked in keeping me in line. And it wasn't until I actually stood up against them, and kind of like you have to stand up against a bully. And I basically had reached that point where I said, oh well, the the point where my brain switched, and that switch went off in my brain. My son was sat on the sofa in the lounge watching TV. I was in the kitchen. My ex had turned up at the house. He was there before we had got home. At the point, I hadn't brought him out of the property because we hadn't reached that point in the settlement yet, so he legally had a right to enter. I couldn't stop him entering by law. So he was here waiting when I got home from work with the child. So I put the child on the sofa. He was 3 at the time. I put the TV on so that he would be distracted. I was in the kitchen. My ex was shouting and screaming at me, and he pinned me up against the wall by the throat and threatened to kill me. And I just said, do it. I am done. I can't take any more. And at that point in time, I just felt like there was no hope of ever escaping from this nightmare of a life. And I would rather be dead than continue being in this situation. And it was almost like a light bulb went off and there was a switch. And that was the last time that he pinned me up against the wall. And it took many, many years after that, whilst he still used verbal intimidation and just that look that can send you back into the corner shaking. It took many years for me to be able to stand up against that. And that kind of light bulb moment was after our son had then refused to talk to him or see him, and he cut him off basically. And of course I was being blamed for it, because of course it was my mission in life to deprive him of his son, because that's obviously what I wanted to do. And he threatened to put me up against the wall again by the throat. And at that point, my battle lines were drawn. I was not going to take any shit anymore. I was done. And that was the moment that everything changed. So at that point, hard and fast boundaries were instated. That man was never going to be allowed in my property again. That man was never going to be allowed entrance to my house again. That man was never going to speak to me again, ever, until the day he dies. There is no need for me to speak to him. There's no desire on my part to speak to him. I don't care what happens. I'm done. You don't get to threaten me in my own home and try to intimidate me and try to send me back to that place of fear. No. And it took courage at that point. It took an enormous amount of strength. And trust me, I was shaking inside, and I basically said no, not doing it. I spoke to Women's Aid, who in the UK is a domestic violence programme for the whole of the UK. They helped me get an injunction so that he couldn't come near me because of the threats that he'd made, and because of the history of violence that he'd shown in the past, which there was an upheld conviction for. And that was it. I was done. So as far as I'm concerned, the man is dead to me. Nothing. I have no need to speak to him. As far as my son is concerned, I have encouraged him to not close the door forever. That he knows his father's contact details. I have his father's contact details. Should he wish them, he knows where he lives. Should he wish to go visit, I have made available means for him to contact him. But no, I'm done. And it took a long time, I think, is what I'm trying to say to you. So don't beat yourself up if you are 2 years in, 3 years in, 5 years in, 10 years in. Don't beat yourself up if you haven't hit that wall yet, because that's okay. Because there is never a good time to do this. There never will be a good time to do this. There never will be a good time to actually confront that shame and to say, do you know what? I have done nothing to be ashamed of. I have no need to keep it a secret because I didn't do anything wrong. And once you reach that point, it is freeing, and it enables you to then help other people and tread that path and make that path stronger and wider so that other people can follow in your footsteps. So if this is something that is affecting you, then please don't hesitate to contact me. I am more than happy to help you plan an escape, help you have a safe route of exit, because safety is the paramount concern, because oftentimes the flash point is when you are literally about to walk out the door. You announce you're leaving, you walk out. That's when it all kicks off. So it needs to all be done safely and with all of that in consideration, and any domestic violence unit will be able to support you in achieving that. If you want to contact me to talk about anything, please feel free. You can find me on Facebook. Just put in Jenny Rock or Jenny Rock Coaching. You will find me. If you want to find me online, I have a website. It's www.jennyrockcoaching.com, and it's Jenny with an I. Just an I. No Y, no E. Just Jenny with an I. And please just speak to somebody that you trust. It's a bit like when a child is being bullied at school. You tell them to speak to a teacher or, a parent or, somebody at Scouts or Cubs or Guides or whatever. Speak to somebody that they can trust. It's the same here. Speak to somebody that you can trust, and you will get through this. Okay? So I want you to feel like there is hope. There is definitely life after abuse, and I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm a survivor, and there are millions more just like me all across the globe. And whatever country you're in, there is always a solution for the committed. Okay? So there is life after abuse, always a solution for the committed, and I really hope that you will find it within yourself when you are ready to speak your truth, to let it out, and to no longer let it fester within you. Okay? Because when it festers within you, that's when it causes the most damage.